Hi guys. So we have just finished 3 weeks of looking at different aspects of creative writing and fiction, and there were a total of 9 short lessons, like mini lessons, and some additional practice sessions that we did on those. So at this point, you should have looked at the instructions now for the project that we're building into this. You're writing a creative story using the strategies that we've covered. Those instructions are on Canvas, as well as the rubric for that. But some of you may still find that despite all of those things, you're having a little bit of trouble getting started. Or maybe you got started, but now you're stuck. So obviously I'm here on the other end of the computer, and you can email me and get some feedback or advice. But I also wanted to provide this short video to give you some ideas for if you are stuck either at the beginning or in the middle, how you can perhaps get yourself unstuck. So let's start by just looking at what you should have. Again, like we had 3 weeks of lessons, short lessons. There were 9 of them total that covered different aspects of creative writing. And if you covered those and took notes, or if you were to go back and rewatch them, you hopefully will remember these things. And also you can look back at the practice that you did and kind of see like, okay, here's where I've been. Here's what I already have. So what you should have is a setting, which means that you have practice using imagery that appeals to all 5 senses. So you have hopefully a good sense of where this story is taking place. And I know this feels like review and kind of redundant, but it's important to just like take stock of what you have, right? If you're stuck, what are you stuck with? Well, you have this setting, and hopefully you have a good imagination for the setting. If you don't, then you should go back and you should flesh that out because it might give you some ideas. You should also have a consistent tone toward that setting. So like how do you feel about or toward the setting? And is that coming through? If that's not coming through, that's something that going back and kind of working on that a little bit will help give you some ideas for the story itself. You should also have some characterization. So the character that you created and put in that setting means that you created or gave them some actions, put them in the setting, and had them interact with the setting in a way that revealed their personality. If you are finding that you have this character, but you don't really know much about them, that you didn't, maybe you need to go back through and just kind of practice having them walk around or interact with the setting a little bit. Because doing that, actually taking it seriously and not just completing it because you were supposed to for a lesson, but actually doing that um, curiously may help you realize like, oh, this is what this character is all about. This is what they need. This is what they want. Things like that. And that might also help you clarify how they change or how they grow. If you don't have a clear idea of at least the direction that you think they should be changing or growing, it's going to be really difficult to tell any kind of story that means anything. It's just going to be a list of events that don't matter. And that's when you really get stuck. So you want to have that character with their personality, know kind of how they're changing or growing. Excuse me. The last thing that you should have is some dialogue. And in that dialogue, it should help you establish the exposition. Remember, that's kind of the background, like this is what the story's all about, as well as the internal conflict that I was talking about with the characterization. And the dialogue a lot of times will help you just kind of get started. It'll help you kind of say like, oh, okay, if I start with the conversation, at least I have a place to go with that. Again, you're not doing small talk. you're doing a conversation that's pushing the story forward, that's pushing the story in a direction. And if you have a direction to go, sometimes you just keep going. Um, and you should have a distinct character voice that allows you to get, keep that character going. Like, would this character say this thing? How would this character react? All those kinds of things. So if you took the groundwork seriously, and you actually practiced it, then if you are stuck, going back to that groundwork and really kind of figuring out, okay, what did it do for me? What direction did it point me in? Could help you at least get started. But that may not be enough for some of you. So here are a couple of other things that you can think about in terms of kickstarting a story that you may be stuck on. Oh, sorry, one last thing before we do that. You should go back and you should see the rubrics on Canvas and just check out the assessment scores, because these three things, setting, characterization, and dialogue, are what I'm going to be scoring your final story on. So you should be aware of that as well. Now let's talk about a few different things that you can do to kickstart your story. Um, and turn it from the technical stuff into the creative stuff. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is a planning strategy for your story. This would be, again, before you write, or if you've started writing but don't know where to go, you can kind of plan um, plan um, uh, a timeline for it. And you do that by breaking it into parts. Now, some of you have probably seen the story arc. I thought this was a creative way to kind of think of the story arc as kind of this roller coaster. So if you're stuck and you're thinking like, where's my story going? You can think of your story as needing these basic parts, this kind of roller coaster sensation to it, and that might help you get some ideas. So basically, all stories need 4 parts to them, and I know there's more than that in this picture. We'll get to that other stuff in a second. And if you know, okay, my story needs exposition at the beginning that gets us going. That's where that's where a lot of our practice was. Just here's the setting, here's the character, here's how the character sounds, here's what the character wants, here's what the character needs, all that kind of stuff. All stories need that at the beginning. Um, some people will skip it. Some really good authors will skip it and kind of build it in throughout the story. But it's a tricky thing to do, and I recommend starting your story in that way. So starting with a lot of the detail that you figured out with your, with the setting and the character and the dialogue, and start there. The next thing that you need is rising action. So if you have a character and you know that this character has to change and evolve, you know the character has needs and wants, then you have to start pushing that character in a direction that's going to get them there, right? What's going to get them there? And it's going to lead to that conflict. How was the need and the want going to conflict with each other? And you're kind of pushing that need and that want together. So in what ways are you going to lead the character through the setting so that they have to confront the difference between their need and their want? What kind of tension is going to build that's ultimately going to pay off in a climax that's going to rectify the differences between the character's needs and wants? So what kind of thing is ultimately going to happen to the character that's going to force them to reconcile what they want with what they need? And how are you going to get them to that point? What kind of action? So what kind of rising action is going to get them to that climax? And that climax can be a big action scene, or it could just be, it could be all like, an internal kind of it could be any number of things, but what's that big exciting thing that's going to cause the character to find a balance between what they need and what they want. Finally, then you're going to have falling action. So the falling action is going to just kind of clarify how the character is now different and how things around the character are different. Did the did the setting change for the character because of the climax? So these are all ways that you can think about the different parts of your story and kind of think to yourself, okay, if I know that my story needs these things and I have to take my character through this kind of roller coaster um, till the end, then that might help you plan different parts of your story. Now, there's some other things on this uh, chart, I guess, that you might want to take into consideration that can help the story along also. So if you're in the middle of the story, some of these things might happen might help as well. So these are optional things. You don't have to have them, but you could. So some authors will start with a really lengthy prologue before the story actually even starts. They'll just start with just kind of an explanation. They'll like a history of the place or a history of the person or some kind of historical event that happened before the story took place. And sometimes writing that out will actually help you clarify what you're thinking. So if you're kind of at the beginning and you're not quite sure how to start, then start with like a history, a prologue, something like that, a past event that is important to where the story is ultimately gonna go. Another thing that people who maybe they get stuck in the middle of a story and they're thinking to themselves, "Oh, what now?" What they'll do is they'll throw in what's called a red herring, and that red herring um, will cause mystery, misdirection, or surprise, is how I've put it. And essentially what a red herring is it's a misdirect. So you throw the reader off the path. You say, okay, I think that everybody seems to know where this story is going. So you throw in like an extra clue that throws people off the path. And what the reason it's called a red herring is because sometimes people would take their dogs out hunting and the dog would be on the trail of whatever it was that maybe they were hunting a rabbit. And so the dog would be tracking down the rabbit, but then the dog would get distracted by something that somebody else put in the path, like something that was more interesting. So a lot of times that was like a fish or something, right? So the dog's on the trail of the rabbit, and then all of a sudden there's this fishy smell, and that's what they would call a red herring. A herring is a type of fish. So, so this red herring would throw the dogs off the trail, so that it seems to add a little bit of extra like mystery or surprise to your story, and then you have to get the story back on track, right? So if the story goes off in a direction, then you have to force the story to get back on the right direction. You have to think about, okay, how do I get them back on this track? So that's something that you can think about doing. The last thing that you could throw in is just a jarring twist or a shock at the end. If you're at the end and you're kind of saying like, oh, well, you know what, what did this character really do? Did this character really learn anything? Did they change? Did the story mean anything? Then maybe there's something at the end that you can throw in that really just kind of helps the reader say like, oh, that's not exactly what I thought was important. So these are all ways that you can break your story into parts and think about the different parts of your story. Think about, if I know I need rising action, or if I know I want a red herring, what is that going to be? And how's it going to affect the rest of the story? There's one other way that you can plan a story, and that's what I'm going to call the hero's journey. So if you're not into thinking of your story as different parts, but you'd rather just think of your story as what is going to happen to this character and what's going on in this character's head, um, then you can think of all main characters as the hero of the story, and all main characters go on this basic arc. So if that last strategy didn't work for you in terms of thinking of your story in parts, then maybe think of your character as needing to go through um, these different stages of their life. So, and if you think you can really think of any story this way, break down any story this way. I'm going to overly simplify it. I'm not going to cover all the things on the chart, but I'm going to explain the big parts of the chart. So um, if you take this and you think, okay, this is my character, this is who they are, these are their thoughts, these are their needs, these are their wants, then start moving them through this, and you can plan them out. So the first thing that's going to happen to the characters, something's going to urge them to leave their comfort zone. They're pretty much happy now, wherever they are at the beginning of the story, right? Like they're comfortable, this is the way things are. You have to throw something in there. What is going to get them out of their comfort zone? What could happen? And we call this the call to adventure. So the thing that spurs them to go and do something, right? Something has to happen to them. Something has to call them away from where they're comfortable. So what is that thing going to be? Um, you know, uh, what's going to cause them to do something that's out of what's normal for them? Um, the second thing that's going to happen is that thing that happens to them, the thing that tugs them into unknown territory, like uh, uh, is that call to adventure, sorry, is going to tug them into unknown territory. It's going to take them somewhere that they've never been. They're going to meet people that they've never met before. They're going to find things that they've never found before. They're going to go places that they've never been before. And that unknown territory then is going to present them with new and challenging situations that they then have to fix. So the third thing that they have to do then is, now that they're in this unknown territory, they're going to face different challenges and temptations, or we could call them trials, that build certain skills. So you can see, like, well, what does my character need to know now that they're in this unknown territory? Now that they're uncomfortable, what kinds of things do they need to know how to do, and how are they going to learn to do those things? And how are they going to overcome those things? Once they've done that, so once they've learned something, once they've acquired some kind of new skill, or they've overcome some temptation, they've met a new person, they've acquired a new object, something happens to them that they didn't have before. Then they face an ultimate challenge that uses those skills. So, or that object, or that person that they met, or whatever. And that's what we call the abyss, or the reckoning. So they have to put that skill or that object or that person to use. Sometimes it's all of those things that they have to put to use in order to overcome this ultimate challenge. And the ultimate challenge is going to change them. So, they're not going to leave the challenge the same. They're going to come out different, and allow them to go home again. Or sometimes they don't go home, but they find a new home. But a lot of times they go home, right? They've gone away. They've gone into unknown territory. They've been presented with this challenge. They've acquired this new thing. They've overcome the ultimate challenge. They've learned something, and then they go home. But they go home a new and changed person. Somebody who has realized something about themselves. So you can, instead, if you don't want to plan the different parts of the story, you can just think in terms of how is my character going to change? How is my character going to go from, what's going to call them away? Where are they going to go that's different? What are they going to acquire? What challenge are they going to face? How are they going to acquire some kind of skill that they're going to then use that's going to change them and allow them to go back home as a new changed person? So this is a very simplified overview, but it's at least useful to maybe get yourself started thinking about your character and what might happen to them and how they might grow. And that could help you push your story forward as well. You might think about, like, actually, if you're a visual person, you can actually illustrate this. Like, you can like draw it out. You could draw the last one out too. And you can just like start, kind of doodling in different details that you'd like to include in your story, even kind of like a comic book before you actually write it down. That's also a very helpful skill that some people will use if they're stuck. They'll start drawing and then start using those drawings to kind of fill in the gaps. So it's also possible that you could combine both of these strategies. If you like one and you like the other, they're very similar to each other, and both of them remain true in all stories. And so you could combine them. And I also want to remind you that writing can be a dynamic process. Dynamic means it changes. It gets louder and it gets quieter. It gets busy and it gets calm, right? And sometimes we're really good at it and then we hit a roadblock and we stop. Or sometimes it changes. It's not exactly what we expect. So it's good to take a break as well, and to just kind of like let yourself think about it for a little while and come back to it. Um, what I want to leave you with are a few different things. Remember that you need to be open to change. You can't think this is what my story must be. It has to start here and it has to end here. Sometimes you think you know what's going to happen, and then it'll change or it'll evolve. So don't resist that change. Actually embrace it and be open to it if it comes up. Second, don't force anything to happen in the story. If the reason that you're stuck is because you think, oh, my character has to go over here and has to do this thing, and I just can't get them to do that, or whatever, then don't. Just let it go somewhere else. Let them wander around a little bit and explore, and maybe something else will come up. Third, you can email me, like if you're still having trouble, like this still doesn't make any sense to me, Mr. Lassard, I'm still having trouble, then you can email me and I'll get back to you as fast as I can. Or you can just ask others to give you feedback, like, can you read this and tell me what do you think? And, what should I do? Or I want this to happen, but I'm not quite sure how. Other people can give you good ideas for that as well. But most importantly, use those groundwork lessons. Go back to your notes, because those basic skills that we worked on for 3 weeks are skills that will pay off if you take them seriously. And they weren't just like, oh, well, let's do this thing. They were leading to writing a story and hopefully writing a good one. So with that, I'm going to leave you. I know this video is a little bit longer than the previous ones, but it's the only one that I'm posting for this particular project, so I feel okay about that. Again, I hope that you're finding some enjoyment in doing something that's a little bit different than just the technical kind of writing that we've done, and I look forward to seeing what you do.